Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So we said in one of our last shows of 2019 that the real story of the year was the same as the previous 2 years, the economy and jobs. More than 7 million new jobs have come online since Trump took office. 7 million. One of the key architects of the Trump economic policies, the great economist Stephen Moore, an old friend of the show, joined us to forecast what's ahead for 2020. And we started by discussing the remarkable fact, perhaps the only one you need to know, that there are now more than 1 million more jobs than there are people to fill them.
So there are about 7.2 million job openings today. And according to the latest jobs report, there are about a little less than 6 million people who are unemployed. So, that means that even if you put every unemployed American looking for a job into a job, you'd still have 1 million to 1.5 million jobs left over. That's a nice problem for a country to have. And I don't think we've ever had that problem before, where we have too many jobs and not enough workers. Most countries in the world, I think, virtually every other country in the world have a shortage of jobs. We have a surplus of jobs.
Now, Steve, Trump is a man famously given to impulsiveness when it comes to his words. But he seems very patient with his long-term goals in foreign policy and trade, most specifically with taking on China with that trade war that seems to have thrown something of a monkey wrench into the works. But now we have the first phase of the China trade deal, which you discussed, in place. What specifically is in this deal, and how likely is it to reverse the downside of tariffs and help the U.S. economy longer term?
Don't forget, Tim, we do more trading with Canada and Mexico than we do with China, and that's oftentimes overlooked. So that's a really important deal to make North America a tariff-free zone. And then, 2 days later, he announces he's got his deal with China. Is it a great deal? No, it's not a great deal. But is it a good deal? Yeah, it's a pretty good deal. It's better than I thought we would get. It's just phase one, and there will be multiple phases of this. But, it basically is going to almost double Chinese imports of American products. So that's a very good thing for the United States. And I do think it was one of the few dark clouds over the economy was whether we could settle this trade dispute and lower tariffs rather than raise them. And that's what this deal essentially does.
Now, the Democrats did, as you say, approve the successor agreement to NAFTA, the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement.
Yeah.
Hours after they completed articles of impeachment, apparently a sudden impulse to actually legislate instead of just investigate and impeach. But how much of an improvement is this as an upgrade over NAFTA?
Well, I think it's certainly a modernization of the Canada-Mexico trade agreement, and I think it's in some ways an improvement. Some of my colleagues at the Heritage Foundation are not happy with some of the provisions, but hey, look, the big picture here is what we have to look at, Tim. What this preserves is the Ronald Reagan vision of making all of North America, Canada, the United States, and Mexico a free trade zone, so that we could compete against Europe and Asia. And that's what this trade deal effectively does. And so I'm proud of it. I think the president can take a lot of credit for this. And look, it's going to pass bipartisan vote, to pass this. So I think it's a huge achievement for the country, and I think Trump deserves a lot of credit.
Our guest is Stephen Moore, key architect of the Trump economic policy as outlined in his book, Trumponomics. Let's talk a little bit about free trade more broadly speaking. Economists and particularly politicians love to talk about free trade as if that's what we have now, which it really isn't. How free, though, is our trade really, and how do you react to Trump being labeled as a protectionist or a trade warrior?
Milton Friedman believed in unilateral free trade. We should have no tariffs, and open up our borders regardless of what other countries do. And I used to believe that to be true, but I think Trump has changed my mind a little bit about this. What Trump is showing is that you can strategically, because we're the United States, we're the alpha male economy in the world, we're the one country that everyone has to trade with, we can use that leverage. And by the way, that's a word that Trump understands from being in business. When you have leverage, you use it.
Yes.
We use our leverage against these countries like China and the Europeans and Canada and Mexico to, basically threaten them with tariffs unless they give us a fairer deal. Because when Donald Trump entered office, he was right. It was not a level playing field. We were playing free trade, and the rest of the countries were imposing high tariffs on us. And at the end of the day, if this works, Tim, and so far it works pretty well, we will actually have less restraints on our ability to trade abroad and to sell American products. And so, you may end up with freer trade, but a more level playing field. And I think that's a win-win for everybody.
Well, while the U.S. economy's been very robust over these last 3 years, we've seen slowing economic growth through much of the world in recent months. To what extent does this global slowdown damage the American economy and threaten to turn down the heat on this economy?
Tim, it's a problem. It's a problem. Japan, Japan, Europe, Germany, a lot of these countries are just not growing. And they have too much socialism. I wish people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders would take a look at what's happening with these socialist economies. It's not a pretty picture. So, this hurts our economy because, exporting is part of our economy. And when other countries are not growing, they don't buy as much of our stuff. And that has had a little bit of a negative effect on our economy and our growth rate. But you know what? Ultimately, I hope what these other countries do is exactly what other countries did back, in the Reagan years. They looked at what's happening in the United States and saying, hey, I want what they're having. And they start adopting our policies. Trump proves it's not complicated. You cut your taxes, you cut your regulations, you provide people with abundant and cheap energy, and you put your country first. You put America first in our case, and boy, does it produce results.
Yes, you simply let people keep more of their money and get out of the way. Now, it looks like after the results of the election in the UK, which produced an overwhelming mandate for conservatives and a repudiation for this increasingly hard-left Labour Party, that really is a reflection of the socialism that you said really exists throughout the European Union, that Britain will finally now close the deal on Brexit. How are you figuring this will affect the economy of the European Union, the U.S., and globally?
Oh, it's just such a positive development, Tim. And, the ultimate winner here are the British people and the British workers. Because, for the last 30, 40, 50 years, Britain has been kind of in this tug of war, whether they move towards the, European socialist model, or do they want to be more like the American, free market capitalist, model. And I think what's happened by shrugging off these entanglements with, continental Europe, they are more likely to move towards the American free market model, which we know is the model that works. And by the way, I would love to see, Tim, we were just talking about trade. How great would it be if Donald Trump could sit down with the Brits and have a free trade deal with Europe? I mean, with the Great Britain. I think that would be fantastic for both countries.
Yep.
I find it so interesting that the Europeans don't want to let Britain out. It's like,
they don't.
The Hotel California, you can check in, but you can't check out. And I think the British people were just so frustrated with the Euro bureaucrats in Brussels who were, they were trying to, it wasn't even about economics. It was about, people in Brussels telling people in Britain what kind of tea kettle they could use and how much energy they could use and what kind of light bulb they could put in their, bathroom lamp. I mean,
right.
This is a victory for sovereignty.
Precisely. That's exactly what it is. So the Brits can be British again instead of European, which they never considered themselves to be to begin with. So that's a basic problem. But, Stephen, let me close with something of a thought experiment, if you will, as we turn from looking backwards to the 3 years of Trump to forward to a potential second term. Now, what can Trump realistically get done in a second term if the GOP also controls the House and Senate, if they only control the Senate, or if he's forced to work with an entirely Democratic Congress?
Well, just broadly speaking, I think in a second term, Trump gets even tougher with China. China is a huge, huge problem for the United States, both militarily and due to their predatory economic practices. And I think the American people are totally behind Trump and getting very tough. We're in a new Cold War with him, don't you think, with China?
Seems to me, I mean, we're in a Cold War between the left and right in our own country.
Yeah, no, that's true. So I think we're going to see some additional toughness with China. I think you're going to see an immigration bill where we complete building the wall, but we also then expand our legal immigration. So legal immigration, so that people can come in to the country lawfully and contribute to our economy and get, as Larry Kudlow would say, the brainiacs into this country and the people who work hard and are so integral to America's success. And then I think you'll also see tax cuts 2.0 with a new middle-class tax cut. But by the way, that's a sharp contrast to where the Democrats want to go, which is raise every tax they can get their hands on. So I expect a very successful second term for Trump.
Stephen Moore, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Tim.
And a Happy New Year.
Thank you.